I'm going to be reading Jake Sees a Tunnel and model how to use some comprehension strategies to answer questions. Now, the very first thing you should do when answering comprehension questions is look at them before you read the passage. And doing this will let you more easily catch on to the details that you're going to be asked about once you're done reading about the passage. Because, for example, number 1 says, "Why does Jake go inside the tunnel?" Since I've read that question, when I go back and read the passage, I know to pay attention for that specific detail. So I want to pay attention to why does Jake go inside the tunnel? Number 2 is going to ask, where does the tunnel go? So I want to pay attention for that information too. Number 3, why is the tunnel cool and dark? Number 4, which of the following happens first in the story? And number 5, listen to the sentence from the passage. Jake steps into the water running through the tunnel. Which word means the same as running in the sentence? So reading through these gave me a good idea of things I should pay attention for while I'm reading this passage. And it is called Jake Sees a Tunnel. So I'm just going to read it and then we'll talk about the questions. Jake is at the park on a hot day. He sees a tunnel that is dark and cool. He goes inside the dark and cool tunnel. Jake steps in the water running through the tunnel. The water running through the tunnel makes his feet feel cool. Jake steps out of the tunnel. He sees water from the tunnel has made a small pond. Jake asks his mom to come to the small pond. He asks if he can play in the pond. She says yes, and Jake runs into the water. So now that I've read that, I can go back to my questions. And number 1 was asking, why does Jake go inside the tunnel? Now before I pick an answer, you have to read all of the options. Because sometimes one will sound good, but then if you keep reading them, there'll be an answer that works even better. So we have, he wants to play in the pond. It is cool inside the tunnel. His mom is inside the tunnel. Now, if I try to think about some details in this story, he walks into the tunnel at the beginning of the story. So I'm going to go back and look at the beginning and pick out some important details. So Jake is at the park on a hot day. So the fact that the day was hot might be a good detail. He sees a tunnel that is dark and cool. He goes inside the dark and cool tunnel. So this is when he goes inside of it. Anything that comes before it will be a detail that helps us. Now when I was reading that, just that part before he went into the tunnel, it didn't talk about him going to play in the pond yet. So I know that that's not a good choice. Because yeah, he went to the pond at the end of the story. This question is talking about something that happened at the beginning, so this one wouldn't make any sense. It is cool inside the tunnel. That might work because it was a hot day and he figured out that the tunnel was dark and cool, so it's probably a good place to cool off. So that answer is a good possibility, but we should read the last one just in case. His mom is inside the tunnel. Now, if I think about what happened, did the mom ever go in the tunnel? No, look where she is right here. She is on top of it watching Jake play. So that is not a good choice either, which means it is cool inside the tunnel is our best option. Now number 2, and I'm going to get a different color so we can see the details easier. Where does the tunnel go? Over the water, into the pond, or to the park? So I'm just going to go back and look and see what it says. He goes inside the dark and cool tunnel. Jake steps in the water running through the tunnel. The water running through the tunnel makes his feet feel cool. Jake steps out of the tunnel. He sees the water from the tunnel has made a small pond. So let's look back and see what our options were. Where does the tunnel go? Over the water? Let's look. That could make sense because look, this is where the tunnel is and the water is going through it, so the tunnel is over top of it. Let's read the next ones just to make sure. Into the pond. The tunnel itself doesn't go into the pond, but the water does. But it's asking about the tunnel. So that wouldn't make any sense. To the park. Well, this story didn't even talk about a park, so that is one that's trying to trick you. So the tunnel going over the water is our best choice. And look, it even shows the mom standing on top of the tunnel, which is over top of the water. Number 3. Why is the tunnel cool and dark? It is in the park. It is in the shade. It is a big tunnel. Well, again, to the park. Now, they are in a park, but it doesn't talk about the tunnel going towards the park because it's already in it, so that doesn't make any sense. Number 2. Where does the tunnel go? Over the water, into the pond, or to the park? Now we can eliminate some bad options here. Over the water. Let's think about that. This is the tunnel right here, so would it make sense that it is over top of the water because the water is going through? I think that could make sense, but we don't want to pick that until we read the next options. Into the pond. Well, we just looked at the picture and saw that the tunnel isn't going into the pond, but it's still water. This is asking about the tunnel, so that doesn't make any sense. To the park. Well, they're already in the park, so the tunnel is not going to lead them to it. The tunnel is in the park. So that doesn't make any sense. Which would mean over the water is our best choice. And it makes sense because if you look at the picture of the mom, she is over top of the tunnel, which is over top of the water. Number 3. Why is the tunnel cool and dark? It is in the park. It is in the shade. It is a big tunnel. Now, there are details in this question that are just trying to trick you. Let's think about this one. It is in the park. If something is in the park, would that be a reason for it to be cool and dark? If that were to be the reason, then anything that would be in the park would be cool and dark. But that's not always the case. Sometimes things are hot. So just because the tunnel is in the park, that would not be a reason as to why it is cool and dark. It's a bad choice. It is in the shade. That could make sense. If something is in the shade, then it will be cooler because it's shaded. That's a good option, but we're going to look at the last one just in case. It is a big tunnel. This is similar to the park option. Just because the tunnel is big, that doesn't mean that it'll necessarily be cool and dark. Because the size of the tunnel isn't going to affect how hot or cold something is if it's based off the area around it. Like if the whole park was cool, if it was a cool day, then everything in the park would be cool. But it didn't tell us that. It's trying to tell us that just because the tunnel is big, that makes it cool and dark, and that doesn't make any sense. So the fact that the tunnel is in the shade is our best choice. Now we have, get a new color. Which of the following happens first in the story? Jake walks inside a tunnel. Jake sees a small pond. Jake asks his mom a question. If we look back, remember what happens at the very beginning. He finds the tunnel and he walks inside. So that'll be the first thing that happens. Because he sees a small pond towards the end, and then even later is when he asks his mom a question. Now our last one. Listen to the sentence from the passage. Jake steps into the water running through the tunnel. Which word means the same as running in the sentence? Practicing, covering, flowing. The best way to do these questions is just to take the word and replace it with the one that it's asking a question about and see if it still makes sense. So I'm going to put practicing in. Jake steps into the water, practicing through the tunnel. I don't think water can practice doing anything, so that doesn't make any sense. Covering. Jake steps in the water, covering through the tunnel. That doesn't make any sense either. Jake steps in the water, flowing through the tunnel. Yes, that makes sense, so I'm going to mark that. So when you do your own comprehension passage and questions later in the week, think about your comprehension skills. Look back in the story, like we did right here, underline important details, and even the pictures are helpful, so keep that in mind. Cross out answers that are bad as well, and then when you have questions like this, plug in the words to see if they make sense.